saying, well, how can we raise more revenue domestically, which is ultimately what we want.
ICai is independent of government. What ICai does is focus on maximising the impact and the effectiveness of the UK aid budget for beneficiaries and on delivering value for money for the UK taxpayer. We were set up as an independent body, and we report to Parliament. We don't report to ministers. Policy is outside of our remit. We do not comment on policy choices. What we do is comment on the way in which policy choices have been implemented and whether they represent value for the UK taxpayer and value for the intended beneficiary. Ladies and gentlemen, as commissioners, we use the evidence that's gained from tools such as beneficiary feedback, from literature review, from surveys, from interviews, from risk assessment, and we triangulate that, and we arrive at our conclusions underpinned by a robust analysis. I believe, Chairman, our scrutiny has delivered some real results. So, for example, we issued our first fully red-rated report in December of last year, which was on DFID's trade development work in Southern Africa. We take no joy in that, because a red-rated report means that beneficiaries aren't getting what they deserve. But nevertheless, it's our duty to tell the truth on the back of what we see. I'm sorry to say that in that case, what we found was serious deficiencies in the TradeMark Southern Africa programme, TMSA, as it was known, and those deficiencies impeded its progress. They jeopardised its potential to generate a meaningful impact for the poor in that region. And the shortcomings that we saw in that programme included its serious deficiencies in governance, in financial management, in procurement, in the delivery of value for money, in the transparency of spending, in the delivery of the programme, in the impact or lack of impact of the programme. And indeed, we were particularly concerned at a time when money really throughout the world was in short supply. But a significant payment in advance of need of some £67 million had remained unused in a trust account in South Africa for 3 years. Also in that case, DFID's failure to use its own body of knowledge in trade and poverty resulted in a costly programme which did not attempt to address or to mitigate the negative impacts on the poor in the short and medium term of actions that could be taken and recommended in order to improve the flow of trade in the long term. We were so concerned in relation to what we found that we alerted DFID to these issues in May of 2013, at the time that our initial field work had been completed. And as a result of this, they carried out a management assurance review led by their internal audit department. And that review verified a number of our concerns. And in the light of that verification, and to ensure that remedial action was undertaken, we then went out again, and we undertook a follow-up visit to Southern Africa. What did we find? Sadly, we found that insufficient progress had been made, and this necessitated the first, and indeed to date, the only fully red marking that we've given. So having then gone through the publication process, in December of last year, the Secretary of State for International Development announced the closure of the TradeMark Southern Africa programme, and that closure in fact did take place earlier this year. As a result of the report, the International Development Secretary also announced that there would be significant strengthenings of the way in which DFID operates. That programme controls would be strengthened throughout DFID. Improvements would be made to DFID's internal audit. And so I hope that you would agree that that action, those programmes, do illustrate the importance of good quality scrutiny. Now, a report on DFID's education programmes in Nigeria, which assess the two DFID-funded basic education programmes in Nigeria. The Education Sector Support Programme in Nigeria, managed by Cambridge Education, and the three-phase girls' education program, known as GEP, which is managed by UNICEF. But a critical part of the original review that we carried out was a survey of beneficiaries. We were out there, we saw, we talked to, we surveyed parents, children, communities, grandparents, as well as the people within Nigeria at central government level and at regional level, at district level, who were responsible, who were working with DFID in order to implement these programs, and of course the DFID people themselves. And the feedback that we got back from those beneficiaries highlighted for us their very straightforward expectations for a basic education for their children and grandchildren, but high levels of dissatisfaction with the actual education that was being provided. And these comments were in relation to the UNICEF implemented programme, not to the Cambridge Education implemented programme, which actually was being carried out and we believe still is being carried out to a very high standard. So due to the shortcomings in the UNICEF managed GEP programme, we recommended very prompt action by DFID over the following year to tackle those identified weaknesses, with a review after 6 months. And in fact, however, it was not until October of last year, nearly a year after our report had been published, that DFID put the third phase of GEP, GEP 3, onto a PIP, a Programme Improvement Plan. That's due to run for 6 months, with a decision to be taken by DFID in the summer of 2014, i.e. a little while ago. But our view is that it took too long, rigorous action was not taken speedily enough by DFID in terms of tackling the serious deficiencies in that programme which we identified. So as a result of that, basic education has not improved at a satisfactory rate. It's been depriving girls enrolled in schools of an education which they and their parents had expected. We find that particularly concerning given the existence of this better performing programme run by Cambridge Education, and of course the considerable challenges that there are in educating girls within Nigeria, which have only been highlighted by recent and tragic events. So, in the light of that, what we did, we reported our concerns both to the International Development Committee and directly to the Secretary of State in order to expedite some action. I'm pleased to report that I heard, in fact, just this afternoon, I received a letter from the Secretary of State that action is indeed being taken, that there is substantial redesign in the coming months taking place in this UNICEF programme, and that the education provided to these girls, so much needed by these girls in Nigeria, will be put onto an upward trajectory and things will improve. So, Chairman, I believe that what we can see here is that as a result of the scrutiny that we carry out, we've been able to have effects beyond scrutiny.
How much are you working with in terms of coordination with the evaluation offices of organisations like the World Bank and the IMF to exchange knowledge on how to do what you're doing?
Right, okay. We have looked very carefully at the question of doing joint evaluations. I think there are a number of attractions to doing that. The difficulties that we have been partly to do with timescale, and that we report more quickly than others are either used to doing or it would appear to be willing to do, and that we report direct to the IDC. So we don't negotiate our conclusions with the department. We don't negotiate our recommendations with the department. We do go through a fact-checking process with them to make sure that things haven't changed or that we haven't inadvertently picked up the wrong sort of information, but we don't negotiate either recommendations or conclusions. Most of the other organisations in the world do get involved in pre-publication discussions of conclusions or recommendations, and are unwilling to change that approach, and that's a sort of fundamental difference.
How strong are you? How can you influence policy formulation and work for the benefit of the beneficiaries?
It has been a concern of icais, this your point about disconnect between DFID and the beneficiaries. I think there are a number of reasons for that. I think often what's told to us when we make these country visits is that DFID's internal corporate processes, it's sort of the machinery of administering aid has become heavier and heavier over the years, and therefore the time available to get out there and spend it sort of understanding the perspective of the beneficiaries has been curtailed as a result. That's one of the things we always look at. I remember one of the first pieces of advice the commissioners gave us when we went out to do these reviews was take a look at the cars. If DFID's cars are too clean, then they're not getting out there and seeing things. But I think, in fairness, I think that this is one area where icai has had a significant influence on DFID in the sense of promoting the importance of that beneficiary engagement. And you now find there is works going on within DFID at the moment to try and build beneficiary feedback mechanisms more systematically into the monitoring and evaluation systems around programs.
Obviously your mandate is to look at value for money, but in your evaluations, have you found that DFID's quest to achieve value for money actually, there are actually some tensions with the impact, for example, in risk taking, and whether they then don't have long enough time frames or they don't invest in smaller organisations. If you could just comment on the risk-averse element.
We are not averse to risk-taking as far as the programmes are concerned. I believe that by taking properly managed risks, by being innovative, there can be real value for the poor